Celebration Sessions, a forum to talk faith, art, and social justice. My name is Marvin K. White. I am your Minister of Celebration, and tonight I am your host. God Memorial Church is a radically inclusive, open and affirming, extravagantly welcoming, racial justice insisting, unconditionally loving church where everyone, wherever you are on your spiritual, your recovery, your community journey, are all welcome. Clyde Memorial Church is physically located on the corner of Taylor and Ellis in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. But like a lot of faith organizations living under this virtual dispensation, we are gathering online during the pandemic. If you would like to stay connected with Glide and this movement called Glide Memorial Church, there are links that will be put in the chat that will show you and tell you how to stay in touch with us. Tonight's program is called Bearing Untold Stories, a conversation with the inaugural Clyde Memorial Church Black History Month genealogist in residence, Alex Trapps-Chabala. Let me tell you a little bit about Alex. Alex Trapps-Chabala is a Bay Area based historian and genealogist on a mission to help all POC, BIPOC people learn about their family histories in a safe, informative, and engaging way. He's a fourth generation Bay Area native, deeply connected to his roots on the Gulf Coast. On the Gulf Coast, Alex is a Black queer activist with a knack for disrupting harmful norms, deconstructing anti-Black ideas about our past, and facilitating healing via our ancestors' experiences. Welcome to Glide Memorial Church's 2021 Black History Month genealogist in residence, Alex Trapps-Chabala. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for having me on. It's such an honor to be in this program with you all, and I can't wait to light everybody up this evening.
Yay! Can I just do that title one more time, please? Because Glide Memorial Church's 2021 Black History Month genealogist in residence. All that on his business card right now. So we are really excited that you said yes to this amazing opportunity for Glide and for the community and for the world in a way that we all are feeling lost in this moment. What a great exercise this month to spend time remembering who we are outside of all of the craziness that's being projected onto us. So welcome again, Alex, and we're really grateful that you have decided to join us this month. So let's go ahead and get started. You know, I wrote on Facebook that tonight's conversation would be an intimate one between you and me and all of our ancestors. So in my creative writing workshops, I usually start with a prompt that says, I come from a long line of. And so I'd love for you to introduce your ancestors and all the people you brought into the room with you tonight by answering, I come from a long line of.
I love that. I love that. I come from a long line of educators, of healers, of street pharmacists, of thugs, of hoes, of healed people, and of broken people. And I am here today because I'm the amalgamation of all of that.
There you go. I think we might be cousins. I know a couple street pharmacists. And another another question: what did it take? What did it take for you to get here? What was your physical journey like? Your emotional journey, your mental journey, your creative journey? Um, what did it take for you to get here, wholly in your wholeness and in your holiness? What did it take to get here?
Mm. It's that is always a question that anytime I have to even ask myself that, I think about coming out of East Sacramento, and the environment that I was raised in East Sacramento. Um, to the point where I've now been all over this world, on a quest basically to find my ancestors and others. One of the biggest things is that I have been going, basically retracing the steps of everyone that I love that came before me. So it's been an experience that's been really cool, basically reliving some of their memories, reliving some of the places that they lived in, some of the places that they fled, some of the places that they moved to, um, and really learning more about myself in that process, learning more about the way that I adapt, and the way that I thrive. So that's a big part of what has brought me to this point today.
I love it. I love it. You know, you when you trace your ancestry, um, you talk about reliving, your ancestors' journeys and stories. How does that feel like, and how do you experience that reliving? Do you feel like you're actually as tired as they are when they were walking, as scared as they were when they were in hiding, or as joyful as they were when they were celebrating? Is that a physical feeling when you're reliving these stories, or is it just a mental exercise?
There's definitely a combination of physical and mental. Um, Being in the places where our ancestors lived, where our ancestors thrived, and also places where they experience all kinds of harm and trauma, is definitely a physical and spiritual one. And so even if right now, for instance, I can't physically be in these spaces, I still can read about their lives or construct a narrative about their lives. And that definitely is a very visceral and sometimes painful experience, and sometimes joyful. I can give you an example. I was reading a sermon of one of my more distant ancestors who founded AME churches in Owassa, Alabama. His name was Alexander Stokes. And I read a sermon written by him in the 1870s. And I almost felt like I needed to shout. And I don't even identify as Christian anymore, but I just felt it. And so, there's so many ways that our ancestor stories come through our bodies, come through every cell. They remember, our cells remember these things that happened, centuries ago even. So I think that sometimes there's this echoing inside of us. And I definitely get that when I'm researching the lives of our dead.
Amazing. We'll have to have a talk over a cocktail one day about this response to this Christian sermon, even though you don't identify as Christian, and we'll talk about the ways in which Christianity moved through Africa, in the ways that Africa is erased from, Christianity. And when we talk about Egypt, and we talk about Pharaoh, and we talk about Ethiopian, eunuchs or monks, this is all Africa, and so if Christianity moved through
Absolutely.
Africa, it got Africa in it. And so that's one of the reasons why I am, a part of this movement called Christianity, because I know my people put stuff in it. And I think it's buried in there, but it's in there. So you probably were responding not to what we think of as Christianity, but the blackness that is hidden inside of there. So I get it completely. So,
Absolutely.
but
Absolutely.
with a cocktail, that will make more sense. Trust me. Um, so let's talk about the field of genealogy of which you are a practitioner of, and you know all about its various strains. I'm wondering if you could tell us about your field of genealogy, your methodology, and how your work diverges, disinvests, or disrupts the field of genealogy.
Absolutely. So I am a genealogist, and by standard definition, that is somebody who professionally researches the ancestries and family trees of individuals. But as a black queer person, I know that individuality is not always the most beneficial part of our narratives. So as a black genealogist, there is no possible way where I can learn about my ancestors without also learning about the people that were in community with them.
Hmm.
So part of being a Black genealogist means that I got to research, my mama and them, but I also got to research their kinfolks, their cousins, the play aunties and uncles, the way that Black families have constricted and contracted over time, the way that in many ways some are imagined and created, and the way that we have to adapt. I, as a genealogist, have to adapt over each generation that I research, be it my own family or those in the past. So, a big part of the way that I operate is that because I know and I experience daily via records or oral tradition what our ancestors were experiencing, I also have to operate with genealogy in a very political and social justice oriented way, where I know that if I'm navigating genealogy, which was essentially never meant for Black people to experience or to have any value in, I know that I also have to actively combat and deconstruct some of the systems that are in place for us not to know about our ancestors and the ideas that are already crafted around our ancestors and their lives. So essentially, I operate from a Black, queer, feminist, and abolitionist perspective in genealogy.
That's amazing. I'm really interested in this, in this thread of Black queer genealogy, because I can imagine that we have to make assumptions. We have to leap over, pandemics like HIV and AIDS. We have to find our ways into hidden social clubs with triple knocks and, are you a friend of Judy, passwords. Um, and I think, you know, if you could say something about, the erasure, particularly, and we'll get back to our general conversation, but what are some of the ways in which, Black queer genealogy, that you found that specifically Black queer folks trace their genealogies?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. So one of the biggest parts is that we have to think about genealogy as when it comes to Black queer genealogy, especially, it is in complete opposition of what most standard, genealogy was done for. The history of genealogy, and I'm going to answer this question as direct as I can. The history of genealogy is one based in eugenics. It was founded principally upon white folks, Anglo-Saxon white folks, trying to make sure that they were as Anglo-Saxon as they could be, and to make sure that they were as far removed from really us as possible. And then as you continue to break that down, they say, okay, well, make sure that you're the right kind of Anglo-Saxon. Make sure you're not Irish. Make sure you're not Scotch. Make sure that you're not too French. Make sure that you're not those Germans over there. And it continues to break down. And then also make sure that you're not, poor. Make sure that your ancestors were able. Make sure that they were wealthy. That's what genealogy was done for. So if, the average white individual researches their family history, it's not really work. It's not. They can push a button and learn about their ancestors really fast. And usually they praise the ancestors who had the widest reach, who had the most wealth, who had these like incredible stories, even if they were immigrants or what have you. They praise that. But oftentimes they overlook the people that made those lives possible for them. And that's where it comes to us as queer researchers or really Black researchers, because we're essentially combating against the other side of the displacement, the genocide, the enslavement that those white folks' ancestors researched for, right? Or were able to establish their lives on.
Yeah.
So when we're researching, even as, like hetero or cisgendered researchers who are researching hetero and cisgendered ancestors, while they're actively combating against those systems as well, they still essentially are looking for, those people who are almost equally as powerful or as reaching as, some of those white folks. But when it comes to queer folks, one of the things that we're looking for are those people that really would be overlooked. We're looking for the queer uncle. We're looking for the person who was incarcerated. We're looking for the person who never married but had several children. Shout out to the hoes that I descend from that are passed down as hoes in the lineage, but they were also healers and root workers and midwives and the folks that provided a space in a community that was worth telling a story about. So that's what being really having a queer abolitionist perspective with genealogy is. And unfortunately, that is a segment that largely I am the most vocal about in this field.
Amazing. There's so many things that you said that resonate with me, particularly about how we think about our history. Glide is a community, and we say it every Sunday, like everybody's in recovery from something. And what makes Glide so amazing is that we are healing together and in front of everybody and in front of one another, and we share, our stories with each other. And usually, you know, we we try to get beyond, where our addiction happened. But I feel like listening to you, like you can find something out about yourself by tracing yourself from bar stool to bar stool and from drinking buddy to drinking buddy. And what about the life of the bartender who served you all those drinks? How do y'all come, you know, and into this confluence, that created you in that moment? So I love this idea of non-traditional, ways of thinking about how we got here, not just skipping and hoping we come from the Mayflower, when you might just come from, Sally Mae and Johnny Flower, but not, you don't go back that far. And I also love this idea that, for white folks, there is an opportunity, you know, to not be as white as you thought, you know, that there could be something very rich in knowing that you are not, Aryan descent, you know, that you actually have a story that is based in something else besides this, this eugenic, pure idea about what whiteness is. I really, really, really love that. Um, Want to get back to the Black experience for a second. The Black experience, particularly around genealogy, is fraught with holes and gaps in our stories. And what are some of the ways that tracing our stories have been made difficult?
Mm. One of the biggest pieces is of course these ideas that center around whose story is worthy to be told. So when I started doing research, of course I was still existing in this space that was like post Alex Haley's roots is what everyone always refers to. So you needed to descend from these people that made an incredible impact, and those were the people that were worthy of being focused on. Was this like story of educated Black folks that rose up from slavery and provided generational wealth and all these things. But in navigating that as a genealogist, the records around even those people were similar to those that were just standardized where you could easily click and learn about them. But then when I thought about it, I'm like, this actually is not most of us. If you coming from that Mississippi, that Delta, these stories are not going to be praised and upheld and seen as something that was worth, reproducing. Those sharecroppers, those aren't going to be told. And so one of the biggest things that I wanted to challenge when I started researching was this narrative of like a person had to be powerful, they had to be wealthy, they had to be literate, they had to be light skinned, they had to be all of these things. And it's like, no, actually, let's tell our people's story from the raw truth that they actually are and find how beautiful and full of life they actually are. So one of the biggest things that kind of occurred when I started researching was that I kept seeing this like regurgitation of ideas of what a family looks like. And I said, okay, let me step out of this and like actually tell the truth and shame the devil about what our families are actually made up of. And I find them to be made up of gold. So
Amazing. You mentioned roots, so we can't let this moment go past without, acknowledging the life and career of blackness and black womanness and opportunity for black folks to show themselves as being multidimensional beyond mammies and pimps. The one and only life of Cicely Tyson,
Absolutely.
who was also in Roots. I can see the scene with her giving birth, and Maya Angelou um, is I believe her mother in that scene. So just a moment to bring Cicely Tyson into this conversation and show appreciation for her life, and um, what an amazing ancestor to have
Mm.
gained in this moment. So really holding her as a part of this conversation. I didn't even think about roots. And is there any connection that you have made with the entry of genealogy through roots to the public imagination and how that impacted you and particularly coming into the field?
Absolutely. Roots was my first reference point to the idea of a family history. I've read that book maybe I've read the book, I've watched the series and Queen probably 11 times. But that framed the way that I essentially searched for my own ancestors, and it helped me imagine and envision the way that our ancestors moved through the world. When I'm interacting with the records that I use to research and reconstruct family trees, um, I try to hear some of these voices or these complicated experiences and relationship dynamics. And that was really informed by Alex Haley's writing. I think I want to say about 50 years before I was born, actually. Um, but Roots is it is the it what it is the platform that I am able to actually exist on. And at the same time, Alex Haley was a man of his time, and it is also in itself an incredible ancestor. I also am seeking to disrupt even some of the narratives that have been continued with that. That's not all of our families. And even though he did incredible work, I also am like, okay, let's tell it all. So that's so I love to kind of like go in this sense of, okay, I got this great writer ancestor, this researcher ancestor in Alex Haley, and I also get to compete with them a little bit, and I love that. And I sometimes feel the humor in the brotherhood across these generations, from that experience too.
Amazing. I remember when Roots first came out, we were throwing like the equivalent of what is called a watch party today. We had a stone tablet and a chisel, and we were just taking notes as it was on the TV. And the TV is this thing that had the like metal things, and it had tinfoil balls on the end of them, and you had to turn it. But yes,
I was waiting. I was waiting on the Marvin K. White humor to jump out tonight.
I'm at work right now. So I'm wondering though, Alex, if you can talk about the role of history and historic events, natural, political, economic, and how history impacts genealogy work.
Absolutely. One of the biggest things that I always try to tell people is that there's no way that we can walk away with genealogy being a bunch of names and dates. Somebody son of, died in, was in this war. That is so boring and so useless. We can't do anything with that. But when we start to add the layers of history to it, I'll tell you, I was born and raised mostly in East Sacramento. My mom and dad are both Bay Area natives. They were the children of Black folks who came to, none of their parents were born in California, but they all came to California for various reasons. My paternal grandmother came with her family from New Orleans, Louisiana, after Henry J. Kaiser was advertising to Black folks in the Times-Picayune, in the newspaper in New Orleans, that if you had a minimal amount of literacy, get the hell out the South and come on to, literally come on to Richmond and Vallejo. And my family is still here. We're the only Trappses in the world because of that movement. My grandfather came here, his family came here to work out in Contra Costa County. Still there. We're the only ones with this name. And so all that being said, we really can't remove the history of World War II from our family's lineage, even though none of us fought in it. We're here in the Bay Area because of a war that was happening all over the world, but it ended up creating so much life. My father has produced a ton of Bay Area hits. He's a musician and an incredible person, and has helped shape Bay Area music culture in many ways. My mother's family came here for different reasons. Both of my mother's parents are academics, and they came to Southern California for an education and came up here basically for work. And in the meantime, they raised their children here in San Francisco. But if we don't look at the history of displacement and tech and gentrification, there wouldn't be an Alex Trapps-Chabala because my family wouldn't have been pushed out of the Bay in the 90s during the first wave of that. So we have to layer that. And that's just my story. But if we went back further, we have to think about things like floods. We have to think about, go back to 2005, thinking about Hurricane Katrina and the way that it displaced people and the devastation that it wrought. Mm-hmm. Thinking about that, that is still a historic event. There are families that are still separated from that. Yeah. So we can't have genealogy without the layering of events that have happened and occurred, be it on the really broad perspective like World War II, or something really personal like Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Betsy, or all these hurricanes with very fierce names. And then we also have to think about, what if somebody's town burnt down? What if a Klan rode through the neighborhood that your family lived in, like mine? Those are things that we always have to factor in, and it really starts to shape the way that your family receives and exudes information and communication to this very day. I can tell you, on my mother's side, something that we pride ourselves on, we ain't afraid of no white people because of what our ancestors endured. We were never taught to look down, to cross streets, to code switch. But on my dad's side, it was a different experience because they lived in a completely different environment. And we see that all the time in the way that we communicate with each other, the people that we choose to marry and have partners and relationships with, the people that we choose to avoid. So that trickles down. We have to contextualize our family histories with the history as well.
Amazing. That's another thing we have in common. Like, my dad was a hit maker as well. We just call them children. But you also make me think, there's this idea of Black exceptionalism and Black striving, that could easily, be a part of Black genealogy stories. Who's the most educated and who's the most noteworthy? And I'm wondering if there is actually room in genealogy for folks who left the South because they heard the party was in West Oakland on 7th Street, and they heard there was good food and good women and good men. And I mean, is there a part of genealogy where we can just celebrate, just the movement of culture and not who ran for mayor and not who bought the house, but who kept the party going? I want to have that in genealogy because that's who I come from.
We have to. We have to. So I always say that we got to do both. We gotta burn the house down, and we also gotta build it, right? So all that being said, in genealogy, I was just having a conversation recently with some fam about this, but they were talking about, okay, well, if your family wasn't in the church and you can't find them in church records, where do you look for them? And I said, jail. And they said, oh, no. For a minute, everybody was silent. And all I can imagine is them clutching their pearls and saying, oh, jail. And I'm like, yes, jail. If they wasn't in church and they wasn't in school, they was in jail. You know what I mean? And so anyways, in these records around things like jail, you'll find stories that are more detailed and more vibrant in these people. And yes, there is tragedy and trauma and pain and some of the things that they either were on the receiving end of or they could have caused harm. But also, when we praise, it always confuses me with respectability. Sometimes we'll have people that will praise, those most excellent folks, the people that were in, the founding, AKA grandma, or, grandpa was, an AME preacher and all this stuff. But then at the same time, like you love people like Al Green and, like all these other folks or the Isley brothers. And it's like that was born out of folks that were really seen as no good to somebody else, right? And so we have to embrace all of that because it's born out of such a thriving and robust culture that you literally can have both. You can have both of those people in the same house.
Yeah.
And so we have to have that in genealogy. We really have to praise dance up the ancestors that were, the uncle who brought around his guitar and drank a pack of 40s or whatever in a day. And then also the uncle that was the first one to go to an HBCU or, buy a house and open a shop or whatever the case is. We can do all of that. We have to.
I love that. I love that we're still a people of first. That there always a possibility, as long as we're living, that somebody in our family line can be the first at something. Um, I love this idea of where the records are as well. I think about the generation that is my grandmother's, who came from Shreveport, Louisiana. She came by herself, and then she worked and sent for everybody, one at a time, is the story. She was a domestic worker, a maid in Montclair for this family called the Steins, um, white Jewish family. And if they hadn't paid her like on the books, like there would be no record of her employment,
Mm.
but she was able to draw Social Security because they actually, you know, registered. She was able to like fill out whatever tax forms that there were, but there's also this. So there's a record of her there, um, and this idea of records is really, interesting to me. We just participated in the decennial, the every 10-year census, where we, you know, volunteered to be counted. We just voted, most of us, in this historic election. So, our name is on, the ballots there. We're starting to get our W-2s and our 1099s. And so there's a record there. Um, even my Grubhub account, keeps showing me how many times I ordered from Lena Soul Food. Um, but, what are we doing today um, that will be in the record that our descendants and our progeny will be looking for in the future? And is there some implication about how we should be living and what kind of intentional ways should we be putting our story out into the world?
Ooh, that is a good question. One of
Ain't it?
the, I think that the biggest part of that is just thinking about this last year that we had. 2020 was a year that in recent history, we have never experienced a year that came with so much action
Yeah.
and grieving and movement in just 1 year.
Yeah.
Um, and that definitely is not only shaping our lives as they are right now, but the implications of this last year and this period that we're in are definitely going to be felt for generations to come, just as we felt our grandparents and great grandparents and some parents, um, still having the after effects of the Great Depression, after effects of segregation and civil rights, and so on and so forth. But it's really interesting because I can only imagine genealogists of the future thinking, oh man, my great uncle Alex talked a lot of mess on Facebook. And
Hmm.
he clearly, had some things to say about this, that, and the other. But some of the same tools that I wish existed, that our ancestors did not have, our descendants, even a generation or two away, are going to be able to push a button and say, okay, I see who they were with at this time. I see who the baby's father is, which is something we just do not have for our ancestors. But also, one of the one of the things that I've been thinking about is how can we be better ancestors? There were things that our ancestors, as Black people, were not able to do at all times, such as write a written legacy and say, my mom and dad was so and so, and they were from Louisville, Kentucky, but I moved out to Chicago, and I got a sister so and so, and whatever. And so it makes things complicated. It makes things complicated to learn what they really felt about the world around them. So I think that one of the biggest things that we can do right now is to actually write or tell our story and narrative in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't have to reflect everything that's going on around you, but at least ways that we can record who we actually are outside of, statistics, outside of what other people project onto us. Telling our own narrative right now is really important, but also being things like the decennial census, like in 2020, for instance, things that are going to be complicated, especially for folks like us that are in the Bay, where we know that between 2010 and 2015, the Bay Area's population skyrocketed with folks that weren't from here. And folks that were from here, of course, were forced out to the Stocktons and Sacramentos and, the Renos of the world, right? And so unfortunately, by the time that the 2020 census rolled around, a lot of these folks, if you notice, the streets are clear now, have fled. So they're not even going to be recorded here in San Francisco or here in Oakland. And then neither are we. So there's this conversation around when I think about my family in New Orleans, for instance, and our family's history in New Orleans. Sometimes I can look and find them in the same house over a 30-year period. When that was Big Mama's house or my mayor's house, as we call our grandmothers there. One of the things that you start to notice is that if there's some kind of tragedy, there's some kind of serious life event, you start seeing people flee, people going and people being absent from what was home for years and generations. And one of the things that I fear sometimes is how in this generation, we are not making ourselves and our communities geographically felt. So one of the things that we can do is to be more present, even though we're virtual, being more present with each other and really letting each other know that you're in community with me no matter what. You are my folks, you are my kin folks, no matter what. And I think that is what will really help us be remembered in this generation and those to come.
Yeah, I love that. So many things. One of the things I worry about most is that my descendants and progeny, won't be able to find me if they looked on like Grinder or FarmersOnly.com because I'm 25 years younger on my profile, and I'm in a different body shape. But hopefully they'll be able to see that and see through that and locate me. The other thing that is interesting to me is,
Marvin, you gotta pause. I'm not gonna let that one. You can't. That's not skirting past me. I, uh, I can just imagine my reaction if I was able to pull up my ancestors' Grinder profiles because I know there were several of them that had them. Okay.
yeah,
I wish that we could have a book of everybody that went in the juke joint. It would make so many of our so many stories in our family history so much more colorful because we'd be able to place names, but we won't be able to find Brian Pumper 123
yeah,
in record, unfortunately. So
right, right, right.
I pray for your descendants to not have to stumble across too much.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm a minister to kind of balance it all out. Um, and the thing that surprised me most um, about going into ministry is it's the opposite. Don't do that.
I'm still with you. I'm still with you.
I thought like the rapture had just happened or something. Um, you know, I made a decision to plant roots and to be still. My 20s, my 30s, my 40s were all about being all over the place. But there's something about being mature enough to know that it's time to plant roots and to intentionally want to be found. I think there's a large part of our growing, that we have to understand that being in place, being installed, taking the job, whatever it is that keeps you in place is not the same as being stuck. It is growing roots, which will make it easier, for your people to find you and triangulate, their journey by. So yeah, so thank you for saying that. It really helps me. And this work of genealogy is, um, I think, is very Black, particularly, um, and beyond, beyond Blackness. It is, for every marginalized group, for every, woman who lived through some history of femicide where women and girls were killed, when, you know, um, descendants of, from folks from Mexico had to flee in a certain way. Um, you know, Whenever, like, we were part of a people that had to put their stories away somewhere, and lock them away because they were at risk of being taken or stolen or erased. I often, theologize this as, we placed it in the cloud. We took our stories and we placed them in the clouds. And, you know, there's this wealth of information that is available to us now. If we can remember the passcode, because it was put in the cloud for safekeeping, because it could be taken, it could be stolen, it could be erased, it could be co-opted, it could be turned into rock music, whatever it is. We knew we needed to hide it because it wasn't safe on our bodies, and we went through a period when we weren't safe. And so that's the cloud. And I think about that because you mentioned what it means to be online as a genealogist. I wonder if you can say a little bit about what this moment, particularly that is marked by the entry of COVID into our lives and this pandemic, and what that means for this move, this migration of information and stories from the body into the cloud.
Mm, I love that. So another part of that cloud is that with our ancestors, where they did endure so many things, or sometimes they kept secret, or they thought that they were locking away in the cloud. Sister Shirley knew probably more about your ancestors' business than your ancestors did.
Yeah,
And Sister Shirley got a daughter who has a daughter who done flipped that around a little bit, but it's still there.
yeah,
And I feel like part of the thing with genealogy is that we have to tap in with all those people, right? We have to tap in with people a pew ahead and a pew behind.
yeah,
So that's one part. And when it comes to being a genealogist online, sometimes the those pews are the people that we're sharing all of our information with. So it's really interesting. One of the things that has really been shaped with COVID, especially, is this understanding that for a lot of us, um, we don't have access to the same ways that we researched before, or the same resources, because we're stationary. We're not able to go and walk into the archive or courthouse like we used to dig and find. Um, and so non-traditional methods have definitely been popping up, but also just the way that we're sharing information now. You have more people that have had time to try to do this work, and you have had a lot of people that are running into brick walls because of it. But it's interesting also because, just to kind of go back to your question about this move to things being completely online. All of our folks are not online, right?
mhm,
That great 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 aunt is not online if you still have her around. that grandma may not be online, or she's definitely not moving through it the same way that you are. So there still has to be a way where we connect with people outside of the virtual, but
Yeah.
with these old stories, and preserve what's happening too. So for instance, with COVID, we now have the virtual funeral.
Oh,
So there's no question of how was the chicken, at the repast no more, which is a very big part of Black life, right? Who got the body is a very, very important part of Black families. So, with that being said, now it's kind of like, oh, did you see so and so in the attendance of the Zoom funeral or the Zoom, baby shower or baptism? Does that answer the question a little bit more?
yeah.
I feel like I kind of
No, that's
set it
really,
up.
I think that's exactly it. I think, this idea that the cloud exists before technology was there's a place to store our stories that was off of our bodies and kept safe somewhere. But also in this technology moment, that there is the actual technology called computers and computing that is a cloud-based storage, but also there's still bodies around that remember, and that we still have to access them as well. So yeah, so that was the question. Um, I'm curious as we begin to wind down. Um, what is the role of religion and spirituality, and any kind of faith, and this is across the board. What is the implications of spirituality on genealogy?
Ooh, our ancestors. I have yet to come across a moment in time where our ancestors had the privilege to even magic their own ancestors. I've yet to learn about that time, and to be honest, I feel like that's unimaginable. So, because of the beautiful people that raised me, I was raised also with faith, believing in magic, believing in spirit, and believing in the presence of my own ancestors. Um, and so we have to navigate our own ancestors' concepts of God, our own ancestors' concepts of faith and spirituality in order to learn about them both on paper and then also for our own spiritual journeys. I believe that many of our ancestors who faced erasure in their own life, and then a paper erasure and a paper genocide, um, you know, in the lives of their descendants, I think that they want to be found and they want their stories to be told. I think that they want us to not repeat some of the same things that they lived through, some of the mistakes that they made, and some of the paths that they followed. I think that they also paved for us as well. So, um, in my spirituality is rooted in ancestors guiding me to whatever point B is. And I sometimes get lost um, along the way, but there's always an ancestor, at the end of some road saying, baby, turn your ass back around and go down County Road 29 in Owassa, Alabama, or down Jackson Avenue in New Orleans, or Magazine Street in Vallejo. So all that being said, one of the big parts about our ancestors is that whether they were Kojic, AME, Baptist, voodoo practicing like me, or Jehovah's Witness, or whatever the case is, I think that their spirits and their God that they believed in continues to live on in us as well. And genealogy is a really, really special way of getting close to them in spirit. I read something a while back that said you must have. I'm paraphrasing, but it basically said that you must have an immense amount of privilege to not believe in ghosts. Um, and when I thought of that, when I read that, I thought about, and it actually is a good friend that said the original version of this, which is Yolo Aki Lee
Oh,
Robinson of Beam Org. Actually wrote this probably 3 years ago at this point, but When I read that, I thought about the amount of recent ancestors that I've had that I have that had to, just do unmentionable and unspeakable things. But I feel this kinship and this relationship with in this present moment, at all times with. I see them in myself so often, because I know that they use a little bit of that magic, a little bit of those ghosts to get through those times as well. So there is such a healing and redemptive quality to genealogy, especially when you go down the roads and the lines that are, less, less aesthetically pleasing. I always tell people, anybody that comes to me for my services, I follow the ancestor that seems like they are the most difficult to trace, because that's where the stories are. That's where the gold is, and that's where the healing. People right now are saying where the money reside. I love to think of in our in my ancestral work as where the healing reside, because that's honestly where it is. Those people also, I think, deserve to be healed by some of our actions, by our remembrance, by our writing and our work too.
I love it. Genealogy as a redemptive act and work. And this idea that our people didn't end up in places, they chose, to go to certain places and they chose to take certain actions. Um, when I think about the story of my mom raising us in public housing, um, where there were no fathers because you couldn't have two income and live in Oakland public housing. So it was an apartment building of 14 apartments, all with Black women as heads of households. And what if my mama just chose to like raise her children around women, you know, um, and not fall for the narrative that's where you send a certain kind of Black woman? So how do we redeem, the stories
Mm.
of our people, by asking just like one more question? We might not appreciate their choices. My family were Jehovah's Witnesses, but if I ask one more question, like why, I believe it's probably because they were so powerful that it scared themselves and they had to hide it somewhere. And what better place to forget your gifts than to become a Jehovah's Witness? So I love this idea of genealogy
Mm.
as a redemptive practice. That just makes me really happy. We're starting to wind up, Alex. Um, I do want to say, that Glide is a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-class, multi-faith, faith adjacent community, of folks of color and communities of non-color. Um, how will your workshops and methodology, how can it be applied to their search and research?
Absolutely. Ooh. This is one of the things that is so special about the work that I do, is that our ancestors, no matter what parts of the racial lines our ancestors existed in, our ancestors' stories were still intertwined, whether they were from the highest rung of society to the lowest. The way that those hands all worked, are linked together. Um, and with descendants of both, realizing history through the lens of their ancestors, what privileges or disadvantages or experiences, kind of coexisted. While complicated, there's healing that happens today with that. I think that was a really good transition from the last question. There's healing that happens in it, and I think that from, all of our ancestors' different paths, really understanding things. Of course, still through the Black, queer lens of our ancestors. I also believe that non-Black people and non-Black ancestors also, have a way of giving insight into how we all got here as well. So, um, in some of the workshops that we'll have with Clyde, we'll start off the first way with everybody acknowledging their own ancestors, and acknowledging where they're coming from, who they were, and then we'll go into basically learning about how to look at their lives, in the vantage of genealogy. So
Amazing. Alex Trapps-Chabala, Glide Memorial Churches 2021, Black History Month, genealogist in residence. Thank you so much for being a part of our family and a part of this evening.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it's been our pleasure. And if folks want to participate in our Bearing Untold Stories series, Alex will be doing weekly genealogy workshops, group workshops for our entire community. You attend a workshop every Sunday at 1 p.m. after or not after you attend Sunday celebration, because I'm preaching. But those two aren't connected. You can come to our community workshops with Alex every Sunday at 1. There's some information in the chat section right now that will give you all the links. And as a participant in those workshops, you can also schedule a half hour one on one consultation with Alex, and he will share with you some of his resources from his company called Kin Connector. Alex, why don't you say a little bit about Kin Connector? I'm sorry, we didn't even bring that in.
All good. Kin Connector is an organization that I started with the aim of helping all people of color learn about their family history through a safe, engaging, and really equitable lens. So we offer a customized report as our chief service, but we also do DNA analysis. We link folks with lost relatives, family reunion planning, you name it, we do it. We're a very, very small startup in our second year. But in the meantime, we are open to all with a focus on helping people of color learn about their families.
Nice. We have Indian. So thank you so much, Alex, for being a part of this evening. There's information in the chat right now for how you can stay a part of this Glide family. Um, Please click that link and sign up for our newsletter, and we can get all of this information to you. We are a church community, but we are radically inclusive, open and affirming, extravagantly welcoming, unconditionally loving community of folks just like you on this road and on this journey, traveling together. We're sojourns in and through this world. Thank you so much for being a part of this celebration tonight, um, the celebration sessions. My name is Marvin K. White. I'm your Minister of Celebration and your host for this evening. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.